Hey guys, Chris from Provo Beast Audio Installation, and in today's video, we're installing a 5-channel amplifier and sub to the factory audio sound system in this 2019 Subaru Ascent. Now, in this video, we're going to show you how to maintain the factory radio while installing an amp and sub underneath the passenger front seat. Let's get started. One quick thing to note before we jump into things, our Subaru does not have the HARMAN KARDON factory amplified sound system. It doesn't have any upgraded audio in it from the factory. It's just the base audio, and so it actually makes it really easy for us to go ahead and install our own equipment with the right adapters. If you do have the upgraded sound system from factory, we'll also make some notes in the description of this video as your install may differ ever so slightly. So let's head over to the bench to show you all the parts that we're going to be using for our install. Alright, so here we are at the bench. Now the parts we're going to go with, first and foremost, is the amplifier that we've chosen to run our whole audio system. We're going with this micro-sized 5-channel amplifier by Scar Audio. Does 900 watts RMS. It's generally pretty underrated, and it will pair nicely to the speakers that we've already installed within the vehicle. Now, because we are retaining the factory radio, we do need some sort of line-out converter, and we opted for this LC2I. Helps with bass roll-off, provides a remote turn-on wire for us if whether we need that or not. It's just a really nice unit for the price. Now, the integration piece, because we are keeping that factory radio in addition to this line-out converter, we need some speaker wire, we need a amplifier wiring kit, and we have these T-harnesses, female ends and male ends, and essentially what we're going to do here is create a T-harness where our end's going to plug into the factory radio, and then the female end will plug into the harnesses, and this allows us to modify the connections in between these two plugs here for our wiring to our amplifier. This is the male ends to reroute the speaker output from the factory radio through our 9-conductor speaker wire to our LC2I through the input, and then the output from our LC2I goes to our amplifier, amplifies that signal, and then the output from the amplifier back up through our speaker wire to the female ends, which will connect into the main harness of the vehicle, sending our newly amplified sound to all our door speakers. This is our amplifier wiring kit. The customer opted for a 4-gauge versus an 8-gauge that our amplifier does require. It's okay, it's a bigger wire, so we're going to have to ensure that we have a really good connection with the bigger, heavier gauge, but we'll link the appropriate size gauge for this amp down in the description of the video. Finally here, since our LC2I is so close to our amplifier, we just made our own really short RCA runs here, but we can link some in the description in case you don't want to make some on your own. This only has 2 separate channels of output, our base output for our base input, and our main channel. There's not 4, there's only 2. So we created a run here that splits from 2 to 4. So this 2 is going to power our 4 channels. And the customer opted for a kicker down-firing sub that will sit in the trunk area. So that is it with all the parts that we're going to go with here today. Now, where we're installing all of this is under the passenger front seat. Now, what we've done is this piece of 12 by 16 ABS plastic. We created a board to mount all our components to. We started with a piece of cardboard here, a 12 by 16 piece of cardboard, and traced it out to a perfect size to fit underneath that passenger seat. Generally speaking, that's where the HARMAN KARDON amplifier will be. Since we don't have an amplifier there, there's plenty of space for our own components. We're going to leave plenty of space for the vents to vent as normal, and this will be a nice drop-in amplifier rack. For all these parts that we're talking about today, we'll make sure we link everything that we're using down in the description. So the first thing that we need to do is grab our harness adapters. Now again, this end will plug into the back of the radio, and then the plugs that we removed from the radio originally will plug in ours. So we'll have these 2 sets, 2 10-foot runs of our speaker wire to each one of these, an input and an output, and we're going to get everything soldered up here today and heat shrunk. So let's go ahead and start prepping our speaker wire. Alright, so what we've done here is we cut one of their about 6 to 10 feet lengths here, just kind of depending on where you put your amplifier. We stripped our outlet shielding off to expose our wires of our 9-conductor cable. This is going to be our input harness, and we indicated that. You can kind of see we wrote input on this one so we don't get them backwards. So this end's going to plug into the original position of the radio. Now there's a lot of other connectors that we're just going to bridge and connect through. They don't need to go to the amplifier. So we're using this wire to redirect that audio signal from the radio down to our line out converter. Now we're just matching color for color here. And our fifth conductor here is our remote turn on wire. Now it's really easy and tempting just to go ahead and connect it to the blue. Blue is generally your power antenna or amplified circuit for the antenna. And that may only see 12 volts when you're listening to the radio and not on other type of sources. So instead, we're going to bridge our blue one into just the accessory wire, which, because this is aftermarket color keyed, it's our red wire. So we'll tee it into our red wire, and we'll show you what that looks like here in a bit. So we're just going to connect color for color. Again, we're soldering today. We've got our heat shrink up and over those connections already, so when they do cool, we can move them up and over and shrink them down with the heat gun. Once we finish the input side, then we'll flip our attention over and work on our output harness. Alright, so we've been soldering for a while here. Now remember, this is the input side because this plugs into the back of our radio. So our speaker wires go through our input harness, and that's going to go to our LC2I input. This is going to supply the line-out converter and amp the signal it needs so it knows what to amplify. The output harness, again, is the female ends. So the second set of 9 conductor cable that will come from the amplifier output, we'll send it back up in here, back into our factory harness. Again, color for color. The wires that we don't use, we bridge. We just keep that loop in. Like our solid blue wire, we didn't use that, so we just loop that through. These browns, we loop those on through because we didn't use those. Our orange is our illumination, same thing. We just looped it through, didn't need that. Power, our LCA2I needs power, ground. So what we did is we have a power and ground here. What we added to that before we just looped it through is we just teed in another yellow and black, and just some parallel wire that will run the length, just robbing the power and ground from our radio just to power up our LC2I. So that's what we've done there, and we tested tape that all the way down. That'll run down with our input harness down to the LC2I. Just snagging some power, that's all we're doing there, and then we looped everything else. Now our remote turn on wire, we're going to snag our accessory or red wire here, because this wire is only on when the key is on, and the 9th conductor in our input harness is generally used for a remote turn on. So we connected that blue wire into our accessory. So input side, output side, 2 sets of 9 conductor cable, and an extra power and ground that will run down to power our LC2I. That's it. So pretty cool that this is all plug and play. Now we're going to move our heat shrink up and over those connections, all our connections here, and we'll shrink them down with the heat gun. All right, so now we have everything heat shrunk, all done and tidied up. Now we'll just go ahead and wrap the rest of the harness in a little bit of Tessa tape. All right, our T harness is done. So this end plugs into the factory plugs, this end plugs into the radio, then we have everything basically connected all the way down. Now we'll cut these to length as soon as we know exactly how long they need to be up underneath the seat here, but we got these all done and ready to go. Prepped our output harness. This is the harness that plugs into the amplifier output. You may have traditional style terminals, and in that case all you have to do is actually just connect your 9 conductor cable directly to those speaker terminals. We don't have that on this amp. We have this type of connection, so we went ahead and soldered on our connection there, just kind of like what we've done with everything else. And our speaker wire output or sub output will go all the way to the trunk area. So we're going to finish looming that. Here's our amplifier. We're just about done. This will plug in here just like so. We just need to do power and ground and a remote that goes to the remote output on our LC2I. Besides power and ground, we're done here at the bench. We'll need to head over to the car and start running our power wire from the battery to underside of the seat. Next thing we need to do is run our power wire from underneath the hood through an inline fuse through the firewall to the passenger underside front seat. Alright, so with the hood open, our battery is here on the driver's side front corner. Now we need to put our fuse and connections. We'll try to go right to this guy here or this guy here. It just needs to be back away from the factory fuse. We'll most likely go here because that is not fused, but this run is. So we're not going to that post. We'll probably go to this post here. Now, We'll put an inline fuse, and then we need to find a place to pass our wire through the firewall. Our factory grommet is right there. Now there is a secondary grommet there on both sides, kind of right by that factory grounding location, but those are up inside the center console of the dash, and those are really difficult to get to the other side. This, however, is right up above the driver's side gas pedal. And so that's where we're actually going to use the factory grommet and pull our wire through. So we have this guy already pulled through there. We started from the other side and it poked out this side. We're just poked a little hole in the grommet, being extremely careful of any of the factory wiring. We don't want to damage that whatsoever. We'll show you what that looks like from the other side. Now up underneath the steering column here, that is where we went ahead and passed our wire on through. Again, being very careful of any of the factory wiring. And what we've done here is taped our wire to our fish, our hanger, a notorious hanger that we use here on the channel. And what we're going to do is lube this up really well with soap and water. It passes through that rubber grommet very easily. And we're going to go top side from the engine bay and pull it on through. Right, so with that wire pulled through the firewall there, we just routed it down. As you can kind of see there, we've already split loomed it following the factory wiring. We came around. Now we created our own fuse holder mount right here out of some leftover ABS plastic from the amplifier mount. We just snagged that bolt there, bolts in nice and tight, and then we did kind of an S-bend here to the positive terminal of our battery. Now obviously the negative is off. So we want that off as we make our connections so there's no electrical shocks to the factory system as we install our aftermarket amp. So that's all done. We modified this barely so it can still clip into place there. And basically we're done underneath the hood. Everything's zip tied nice and clean. We just need to continue running the power wire now inside the cabin of the vehicle towards the passenger underside seat. So we got our amplifier all into place. Now we got our power and ground connected. The way we did our ground is about right here. There is a factory ground location. What we did is we cleaned up the paint really well there and put our ground to that bolt. And we'll fold this back away. So our power and ground is done. You saw us feed it all the way to there. Got it hooked up to our amplifier. Now we fished our T-harness and our bass knob cable through the vent hole. We went up, over, and now we have come out to this point. Now we got to go ahead and get the factory radio on out so we can fish our wiring through and make our connections to the factory radio. All it is a plug and play. Then we'll fish our bass knob probably to the underside of the steering column where we'll mount the bass knob for the subwoofer. Alright, so at this point in time we need to get the radio on out so we can install our T-harness. Now essentially it's just going to be plug and play. What we're going to do at this point is get this out just long enough where we can make our connections and then make sure everything's working correctly. Then we'll get it all back reinstalled. Now it's relatively easy to get this guy on out. These outside bezels need to come out. They're just held in with clips. And there's 4 10mm bolts, 2 on each side of the radio. And we're going to pop out our upper buttons here as well. That's it. Everything else is just pops on out. So I have a 10mm socket as well as a panel tool. Let's go ahead and get this thing popped on out. Just like that. There's 2 clips there. Clip, 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 and clip. Next, we need to pop this guy this way. All right, go ahead and remove your 4 10mm. Okay, so we fished our wire up into the dash. So what we're going to do, disconnect the harnesses that we need They're right here in the bottom corner. They look identical to the ones that we're going to plug in. So there we are. So we're going to go ahead and plug ours into those. Just like that. The ones we disconnected. And then we can tuck that guy back down into the dash. Out of the way. Now we're going to connect ours to the factory plugs. So with those now connected, we can tuck our radio back into the dash carefully. Now before we reassemble everything, we want to make sure it works. So we're going to go ahead and put the negative back on the battery since all our connections are now made, just to ensure that from this point forward we can start reassembling and do a little bit of tuning. Alright, so with the factory radio back in, all our harnesses are connected, and the power and ground is done on the amplifier. We went ahead and reconnected the negative back on the battery. Alright, so from the front seat, we just snaked our wire underneath panels all the way back for our subwoofer. Left plenty of length here so we can move it around as needed. Alright, so we got all our wiring all cleaned up here. We just need to now set our gains with an SMD DD1, but at this point of time, it all fits in there so well, and it's nice and clean. Got the radio all back together. At this point, we need to do a final tune test, and we're just about done. Alright, so we got our gains all set. Everything is done, good to go. This thing sounds amazing. It looks amazing. It fits in there perfectly. Plenty of bass, and we're keeping the factory head unit. But that LC2i makes all the difference, especially with any bass roll-off that you may encounter. So we also did speaker replacements on all four corners of this vehicle. So if you want to see how we did the front doors, the rear doors, and the dash tweeters, link those videos down in the description for you. That is about it for this install. If you like what you saw, be sure to hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe. We post great content on the channel all the time. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you in the next video.